Now, I'm honestly not sure how long this video is going to be, because it depends on the level of detail I want to go into. I don't think I'm going to get into discussing the Mandate of Heaven and the Chinese view of their position on Earth and how that affected their trading systems and relationships with other nations and powers around them, because whilst it does have some relevance of the Imjin War, I don't really see the fact that the Koreans have such a strong navy as a function of their being the little brother in that relationship. And the Koreans do have a strong navy as a rule, almost in complete direct opposite to the efforts of their own government. The government of Seonjo of Joeseon is just not good. It's just not good. But again, that is something we are going to be talking about as this video goes on. And we could also find ourselves talking about the practice of shudo and keeping wakashus in Japan. If I feel that, Toyotomi Hidetsugu should be discussed, or needs to be discussed. But honestly, it's more of he's more his uncle, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who is the focus of today's discussion. I love this topic. I love studying all these different parts of history and bringing this all together, because the point about naval history is, whilst the culture's approach to it may be different, and their approach to naval warfare might be different, ultimately it is the unifying factor of many nations across the world. Many empires across the world. They are seeking solutions to the same problems when it comes to sea. When it comes to land, there's going to be all sorts of contextual issues, etc. With sea, it's always going to be an issue of transportation, i.e. logistics, and access. It's all about control the sea and whether you can use that control. Now, this is a really interesting war to study because, frankly, the Japanese never really have the forces to gain control of the sea, because they really don't invest that much in warships, because they think in terms of sea maneuver as logistics, as maneuver, transportation. They don't think in terms of getting control of the sea as something you can fight for control of. Because of course you can't fight control of it, because a storm comes along, you're blown out the way, or the currents come and the ships have to come home. You can't control the sea, you can control the bay. And it's that philosophy which then guides the development and deployment of their forces. Whereas for the Koreans, they do believe in sea control. And they do build forces which can achieve sea control. So they actually have a far stronger war fleet than the Japanese. It's a really weird situation, though, because mostly they only have this war fleet because some of their admirals ignored their central government and actually found other ways to pay for them. So they have this concept, this theory, but they only have it actually as a practical capability because pretty much their admirals were ignoring what they were telling them to do. Mainly because, how do I put this politely, Korean politics and Korean leadership at this period suffered from a very significant issue. If you found yourself with a smart subordinate in Korea, in direct contrast to what you did in the Royal Navy, which is when you went, ooh, I'm going to become your patron, because the more you achieve, I'm going to look even better. In Korea, you went, I have to get rid of this person, they're a threat to my position. Either through blackmail, either through fabrication, through whatever means necessary, I have to get rid of this person. I can't think why their army was defeated so often. I really can't, if that's what happens every time you have a pathway through successful officer. Successful junior officer, because, yeah, they're gone. They are gone. And officers who fight against that policy are far and few between. Or few and far between, depending on how you want to put that phraseology. But still, they are there. And we're going to be talking about one of those officers today, Yi Sun-sin. And I wanted to talk about May. I know, it's a month. Why am I picking the battles in May? Why am I not doing the whole war? Well, because they show an interesting progression. The opening of these wars, the opening of these conflicts, and in many ways, the speed at which certain things appear. For example, the Kabuxon, the turtle ships, shows me, as someone who studies naval history and studies construction, that these ships were being built before the war began. And the fact is, they're older than the war we're talking about. This is the war where they are most famous, between 1592 and 1598, the Imjin War. They are most famous for their involvement in this conflict and the battles in this conflict. But the first records, the first discussions on them, are this time pronounced, described as Kyuson, come from 1413 and 1415. So come from nearly, very nearly 200 years earlier. It's 180. But let's be honest, if they're actually if the court is actually writing about a warship in the terms of the history of the Joseon dynasty, and considering that court's obsession with ignoring some of these things, they were probably around a little bit before then. They would probably have been around a little bit before then. I would say the main difference you can find between the Kusan and the Kabuxon, i.e. the turtle ships of the 1590s versus the Kusan, the turtle ships of the 1410s, is their size. The later ones seem to be bigger. The later ones do seem to be bigger. Now, again, I'm talking about May, and I've picked May as the month, but there is a dispute as to whether it's the lunar calendar or the Gregorian calendar when they say May, June, and so there is a little bit of what I would call historians' favour I'm asking for. Realistically, this war begins, and it's always weird to say it begins, because the Japanese haven't got something else to do. They've been fighting civil wars for a long time. They finally got control and finally got stability in a central government. And unfortunately, one of the problems when you've had a civil war going on for quite so long and so much internal fights is you have a huge number of soldiers. And you now need to do something with them. Quickly. If you demobilize them, which is always a sensible option, that's a good thing, but that means that you might need to rapidly remobilize them again if you find any of the internal problems arise again. So ideally, what you want is to send those soldiers away, but not too far away, to fight a war so they keep their skills sharp and perhaps earn you some money through plunder, but be close enough you can call them back. So you always have the threat of, I have a rather large army if you cause me too much trouble. It's not here now, because we're being friendly, and we're all lovely good friends here, but you do realise my army's not that far away. I can call them back. It will actually cause fun. It will cause a lot of fun later on for when the dynasty changes in Japan, but we'll leave that to one side. But realistically, there's also the fact that Korea has suffered from an even worse malaise than Ming China is at this point. Ming China at this point is, to say they are suffering from conceit and are not investing enough in their defense, security, and their infrastructure is to be very, very polite. I really aren't. The Koreans, well, as we were talking about their political system, and this is really a point which we should probably jump on to their political system, Seonjo of the Joeseon is probably the most meh ruler of all time, and I do mean meh. It's just meh. It's just, he is vain. He is swayed by whoever he talks to last, and he is just frankly, he just doesn't really want to rule, is my view. My view is he doesn't think he even needs to rule. He thinks everyone else will do stuff for him, and he can just wander around doing whatever he feels like, broadly speaking. Saying that, when he'd first been crowned at the age of 16, he'd actually done some quite good things. He brought scholars and different people to his court to advise him and to listen and to try and work these things out. Now, this sounds great, and for the first 8 years of his reign, it really is, because he's actually interested in solving problems between them and keeping those factions of academics in line. But speaking as an academic, who I'm a historian, not a philosophy academic, I've worked with a few of those over the years, I would say this. When you have factions which are made up of multiple people from an academic style background, yes, they're New Confucianism scholars. New Confucianism is basically, we're trying to take Confucianism and take the Taoism and Buddhism out of it. As understandable as that is, as you know, is you're trying to move away from religion as your basis of your philosophy to rationality, to logic. Once you're starting pursuing that end and pursuing that as the basis of your ideas, you can go quite quickly divorce it from reality. Because you're already moving away from one of the foundations and core foundations of your life, of the world you're in, of the system you're in. And that causes problems. Now, then you start to get to the level of the debates where they are literally forming factions based on where they live. You have the Western faction, who are originally descendants, and they are ultra-conservative and connected to the Queen, and they really don't want to do things. And you have the Eastern faction, and the Eastern faction are about more, they want to do some liberal reforms, and eventually they sort of get ascendance after about 8 sort of so years. Especially when he steps back, they take ascendance. The trouble is, they then break up into the Northern and the Southern factions, depending on how quickly they want to do those reforms. And then you have the Greater Northern and Little Northern factions. It's brilliant. They won't even live near each other. And these factions debate over everything. And it's the problems you have with the army writ large. They literally don't just want to win an argument. They want to annihilate their opponents. It's more important for them to be right. It's more important for them to be seen as right, actually, not even necessarily to actually be right, for them to be seen to be right, than it is than it is anything else. And the best way to be seen as right is for the opponent to be dead. And banished and gone. And so that's what they push for. That is really what they push for. They are obsessive almost in it. And this causes a lot of problems. In fact, I'll be discussing this a bit later when we talk about the starting of the war. They literally have to try and balance things when he's sending out people to go and investigate Japan to find out what's likely to happen. They send someone from the Eastern faction and the Western faction to go investigate what's happening in Japan. And they come back with completely different takes on events. One is, they're massing a lot of troops, and the only reason they could be doing this is if they're coming for us. And the other one is, they're massing a lot of troops, but they're never going to come for us, because why would they? Let's cut spending on the armed forces even more. And if it wasn't for the fact that the faction is very focused on Korea, you would be very tempted to think that they were, how do I put this politely, working for the other side. But they're not. They're honestly not. And this, to me, gives us a long tradition of political parties, whether they are made up of academics or any group, honestly, can ultimately become more about winning the political battle, whether that's the ear of the king, whether that's control of the country and the ministerial positions, or whether that's the public, and scoring points on this imaginary political board, than it is about actually the long-term success of the country. And honestly, I don't have any idea for how you properly manage that. The only real way I can see is if you have a properly informed public and you do have elections and the public actually do exercise their right and get rid of the people when they're like that. But my own experiences with democracy suggest that's unlikely. But there again, democracy isn't the best form of government, it's just the least worst we found. That's the real situation. Governments, there's no such thing as a good government. There really isn't. Ultimately, they always have humans, and that's always a source of problems. But leaving that to one side, we will now move on to the Japanese government. Now, the Japanese government is not any better. In fact, realistically, the Japanese government is a mess of various decision-making processes going on, which is why they're in the situation they're in. You see, the guy who is de facto shogun, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, can only be imperial regent and chancellor of the realm, or that's roughly what we're translating as, but it's Kanpaku and Daiju Daijin. As he was of peasant origin, so he couldn't be shogun. So he didn't have the security of being shogun. So he can't afford to get rid of the armies. He might be the man who's managed to unite Japan, who's managed to get everything working together, but he cannot be shogun. And this means he's weak. This means there are other daimyo, other lords who are constantly plotting against him. So this is one of the reasons why you have this situation turn about. You also have the fact that Japan has left the tributary system with Ming China, which is why they are theoretically blocked out from trading. But when you consider there is also the Manchukuo, who are to the north of Korea. Now, one of the reasons why the Koreans are actually investing in their armed forces a little bit is because the Manchukuo keep raiding down as both pirates and troops on their northern border and into their sea lanes. And again, the Japanese are noticing this, are noticing the weakness of the Ming Empire in trying to take them down, and are trying to work out what they're going to do. Now, this leader is also... he's nuts. That's the easiest way to put it. And I don't mean that in a rude way. It's just the easiest way to put it, to get into him. I think he probably does have a logic going on. You don't get to the position he is without being pretty smart, and you don't hold on to that position as long as he does without being pretty smart. But the situation he's found himself in, with such little support, having to depend on a nephew and then finally having a son later on in life and all sorts of things, means that he is constantly weak. He's constantly in a fearful position. As much as his martial prowess and his strategic abilities and diplomatic abilities have got him into that position, he is in trouble. He is in trouble. And that being said, let's get this back to normal. Now, if you have seen the eye thing and the black and white, please note they're bets with little cousins. I've done it. They now have to do a lot of revision for their key stage freeze. Ha ha. Uncle wins. And frankly, don't take this the wrong way, I'm fairly sure Toyotomi Hideyoshi and, well, frankly, I wouldn't care. I like the Korean people, and I think the Korean people deserve it, but I honestly don't care that much about Hyo-sun. I just don't care. He annoys me in so many ways, and one of those is because, unlike Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who does launch a war of aggression, who does do all this, I can see where his logic is coming from, and he is leading his people, and he does mostly reward those people who give him success, and he does look after those people who support him and who do good jobs and reward capability. The Korean system at this point is a disservice to its own people, and honestly, I can understand why everyone's looking at it as a weak and easy target. Because literally, we are being attacked right now. Oh, that's terrible. However, is it good to spend money on the armed forces? No, we should spend money on random thing going on. We'll spend money on that. And again, it's not necessarily a bad thing to spend money on those things. It really isn't. But it's kind of like a couple hundred years later, when the Chinese are ordering battleships and someone decides that instead of ordering a third battleship, he'll build a massive statue of a battleship. Because that will show everyone how powerful they are, because they have so much money spare, they can build a statue of a battleship, which will cost more than actually building a real battleship. So that shows their power. It doesn't work like that in reality. It never has worked like that in reality. I'm not sure which particular scholar thought that was a good idea. There have been scenarios where, yes, you do show off the power and wealth of the realm. That's certainly a thing. You know, you have gold and things on ships' sterns and all this stuff. Yeah. But the important thing is you have the warship. It might have an ornate stern to show off how much money you have, because you can not only building a warship, but you can afford to risk all this money being spent on random decoration. But you still have the warship, rather than having the decoration and no warship. I know it's taking it to a logical conclusion, and I can understand how the academic got there, and I am going to say it's an academic. I love my colleagues. I love my fellow academics, and the research skills and the analytical skills you get taught, and logic skills you get taught, and how much it focuses on study, and it's where you can focus on study. I love all that. But even I admit that it's only someone who's a very much of an academic persuasion can get to the point where they think that building a statue of a battleship is as good as a battleship. And for those who want more information about that, please go talk to Drac NFL. He's done an entire video about these things. I haven't, because honestly I find it depressing. Admiral Yi Sun-sin, therefore, comes in, and this is a man who has a history. And he is the absolute perfect foil to this gentleman. And honestly, to an extent, you can understand why the Korean government was regularly worried about Yi Sun-sin, because sitting across from him was a guy who literally had risen up by his ability to wage war to running a country fairly efficiently. Efficiently enough that when, after he dies and a noble house manages to take over, depose his son and do all sorts of things, they basically keep his system going. It's just they're able to be shogun because they're from the right background. Competency scares certain forms of government. Really does. Especially governments which are more concerned with looking with what they're saying looking like the right thing than necessarily worrying if it is the right thing. That is an organisation which is inherently afraid of competency. It just is. Now, rather like most figures of his period who have achieved some glory, his particular story can be romanticized a little and exaggerated. For example, some of the things are, when he was a child, he was enjoyed playing war games, and he was always chosen as the leader. Always chosen leader. Having been a kid myself, I can assure you that's very unlikely to ever happen. Very unlikely to have ever happened. But, these things grow up. It's like when people start comparing him to Nelson. And I sit there and go, but they are very different admirals. That's not to say one's worse or better. That's not what I'm saying. They're very different. Nelson is a geostrategic officer who's deploying forces. Yi Sun-sin is an officer who is building and training forces and then deploying them in a localized region. There is a difference there. There is a very great difference there. And frankly, when you start comparing them and start going, this one's this and this one's this, you are in many ways demeaning both. Because I wouldn't put Nelson in charge of a building program of ships. He'd get bored and run away. He liked to go and fight battles. Yi Sun-sin is the type of guy who goes and reads stuff, learns stuff. And he does come from quite a prominent scholar family, and who have also been involved in military affairs. And so he is very much capable of doing his own research. And I think this is where the ships come from. This is where I think his Kabuksan, the turtle ships, come from. I think he's been working on them for a while. And we'll get on this when we start talking about the Korean ship design after Shameless book plug. But the thing is, he's been working on this ever since he's been put in charge of naval affairs in a particular region. He's one of many admirals. He's not the only admiral. He's one of many admirals who run their own naval regions. But it's noticeable to note that his region is by far the best prepared. But to be fair, that probably has something to do with the fact that whilst when he passed and joined the army and he was doing well, he managed to succeed at several battles versus the Jurchen, aka the Manchu marauders, and he managed to actually win several battles. He was falsely accused of desertion in battle by General Yi Il. That's the same general who would later fail at the Battle of Sangju versus the Japanese. Rather appropriate, because, he was just being a bit too successful. After all, it's the way you reward your successful subordinates, by getting them imprisoned, tortured, stripped of their rank, and then allowing him, once he's been released, to fight as an enlisted soldier. But very quickly after that, Yi Sun-sin is rehabilitated. First of all, he's appointed as commander of a military training center, then later transferred to become a military magistrate, and slowly he's promoted up, getting Jeolla province, what was otherwise known as the Left Naval District. And when he's given that command, that enables him to do a lot of work. He gets that command in late 1590. And he has risen to a very senior position. But commanding that, that doesn't give him security. It means he's now out of the line to be a threat to the major generals, but he's still in the threat of problems with the court. And the court is constantly conspiring against what they see as potential threats. So, after he's got his post, after he's set up and fully installed, because of various rules, he's fully installed in 1591, he's able to start undertaking a build-up and a building program. And basically from March 1591, he is working on reforming his navy and strengthening it. And so that's what you're dealing with in 1592, as far as his navy is concerned. He's been building it for a little over a year. He's been working on it for a little over a year. Because, well, the war begins in May 1592. So he's had a little over a year to prepare and build his fleet up. Now, he's concentrating on infrastructure first. He's concentrating on all sorts of things to strengthen it, to reform it. But his fleet is going to be a fleet which is actually ready for conflict, ready for battle. And that matters. Now, it's worthwhile considering, therefore, what he would be fighting. Before we start talking about his fleet, and that's after Shameless book plug, we're going to talk about the Japanese fleet. Now, the Japanese fleet were mostly transport ships. The vast majority were transport ships. When they have warships there, they usually call them warships specifically, and they're mostly talking about sekebun, which are their smaller warships. Atakebun, like this, are their larger ones. And they are rare and special. And they are designed for archers to fire from and troops to board their enemy from. You must remember that where the Japanese do think about naval battle, they think of them as boarding actions, as vigorous engagements where you storm your enemy's floating castle and put them to sword. I'm not saying they're entirely that way, but I'm saying the vast majority of commanders, that's how they treat naval warfare. Mainly because that's what naval warfare is like in Japan. Their experience of it has been entirely focused on this scenario. There's nothing wrong with this, it's just not particularly effective. Now, they have upgraded to arquebuses over bows and arrows, and they have got gunpowder weaponry in that case, but they haven't developed a lot of cannon. They don't really have larger gunpowder weaponry. They have individual weapons. So again, that's part of their fighting plan, and the Sekebun are especially critical for this because they would often be loaded with a load of arquebuses, and their job is to position and maneuver around the battlefield, basically blasting away at people. And that's great, but you're not going to sink ships that way. You're preparing ships to board them and take them. You're not sinking them. Anti-personnel weapons might allow you to clear the enemy decks, but that's only if you can fire on the decks. And that's a limitation. Still, they're fairly good ships for what the Japanese are expecting them. And for their doctrine, their tactics, they are fine examples and capable vessels. They're just not really the vessels you need to go and do contested sea control. And why do I say this? Well, they tend to be longer and slightly thinner. This makes them excellent in terms of their hull and deeper hull as well. This where they tend to have more of a V-shaped hull rather than a curved hull sort of thing. So it's more like this and less like this. And that makes them very good for transiting and for rapid transit from point to point, from A to B, going backwards and forwards. It doesn't make them very good for maneuvering in shallow waters and in close waters, and the close style of maneuvering at the combat ranges which we're talking about in this period when it comes to battle. This is not what you want. It's a really interesting juxtaposition because as time goes on, you want ships which are longer and thinner proportionally because they give you higher speed, and as you get bigger guns and all these things, suddenly that becomes more of an advantage because you're able to cruise more efficiently around the world. You're able to maneuver within the scope of the larger weapons which are firing at massively long ranges because you maneuver your turrets, you don't maneuver your ship. or you maneuver the missile, or the missiles maneuver. You don't maneuver the ship for the engagement. When you are maneuvering the ship to enable the engagement, you need the ship to be as maneuverable as possible. And usually, that means a slightly shorter, slightly, well, for want of a better word, plumper vessel for it to have better maneuverability characteristics, especially when it's made from wood. Both the Korean and the Japanese ships are mostly made from pine. They are mostly made from variations of pine, with usually oak pegs rather than screws, rather than any sort of steel iron bolts or things like that. They have oak pegs being used. And that's actually a good thing, because when that oak soaks in water and gets wet, it expands, which actually means the ships grow stronger. The seals grow stronger as time goes on. But it also has other issues in that it means that wood rot and the life expectancy of ships can be an interesting thing. You have to look after them, you have to have the infrastructure. And again, the Koreans have that, the Japanese really don't, because they haven't needed it. Shameless book plug time. So it's time for the shameless book plug, and I often use the shameless book plug for more than just book plug. I use it to, well, talk about other stuff that is coming up on the channel, to say thank you to everyone for liking, sharing, subscribing, supporting the channel. Especially to the fact that so many of you seem to be return viewers, and that's good. I like having return viewers. I'm sorry shorts haven't been coming out as much recently, but I'm working on getting back up to full spectrum. I've been recording them, and I'm trying to build up a hefty dose in reserve, so that then they will come out and it will be a continuous, and I won't be always worrying about them going, oh, I need to record one for tomorrow. It'll be a case of, I've got them recorded for the next 4 weeks. Okay, now let's sort that out. And shorts are clips of the long form videos, but they are good for getting people interested. They are good for attracting people, so I hope they work. And, well, yeah, thank you for your support. Thank you for everyone who's a patron, who's a member. When this goes out, because I'm recording this pretty much 2 weeks before it goes live, and I'm trying to get into the habit that I am going to be recording videos weeks before they go live, so that they are more banked up, especially considering I've got some more stuff to do with closing up the old house, etc. this year. I want, and it's kind of weird to say that, so I might have started things and might have managed to get everything together earlier, but hopefully things will be settling down soon, and we'll be on a more stable footing with the video output, and they'll be coming out more reliably, and there won't be the occasional random gaps. And I'm sorry about those, but hopefully it's going to be getting better soon. Isn't that right? It would really be helpful if someone, and I'm not going to name names at all, someone and his brother were to stop requiring quite so much attention from the very nice lady vets. Someone? Anyone? Yeah, possibly could clean itself up and stop being ill? Yeah, that's not really in your control, is it? You cute thing. Anyway, thank you for your support, and let's get on with the Korean vessels. So the first thing you always have to realise when we start looking at these ships and we start talking about them is the Hyposons. We don't have any pictures of. We really don't. There might be some Korean language sources which haven't showed up in my searches, and one of my friends who is far more of a specialist in this than me is currently on maternity leave. And she knows this far better than I ever will, but I'm not going to disturb her with what is basically a work inquiry. She'd probably find it fun, but seeing as she literally gave birth 2 days before I did a live of this, I'm not going to disturb her with such a question until we are much further along in the process of her recovered. Then I will probably ask her and go, are there pictures? And if there are, I will do a special little key ships video where I will go into it and go, look, there are pictures. So, I'm not disturbing her. But as far as I know, and as far as my research has revealed, the Hyposons are just smaller Panokasons, and they are used for even more inshore work. There are also fishing vessels which are often regularly adapted. And there's a possibility that hypersons are literally vessels which are one sort of deck lower, in that they don't have the built-up fighting deck above the oarsmen. The point about all these ships is they are designed very much for combat in Korean waters, for keeping the Korean fishing areas and the Korean trading routes clear. And when you realize the primary Korean trading is with the Ming Empire, you realize that's mostly coastal trade. And so these are literal combat ships. They are for the literal waters. And to me, the Karbuksons, as the turtle ships, they are quite simply, you've taken Panakyasons, a hull you've been building. It's very, very similar. It's very similar structurally. And you have built it with a cover. Now, believe it or not, that model is not a full-scale model. That is one of the replicas produced for a TV show. They did an absolutely exceptional job. And it really does show its stylings, it shows its shaping, it shows it's built for maneuver. The other thing is these ships are built for cannon. Okay? These ships are built and outfitted with cannon. The Koreans, and again, this is the joy when you look at the Ming China, you look at the Joseon Korea, you look at Japan, they've all got different methodologies of gunpowder weaponry. None of them has really developed a full panoply. The Japanese, by far, have the advantage in man-portable weapons. The Koreans have the advantage in cannon. They really do have the advantage in cannon. And this gives their ships an advantage. And there's quite a sensible idea around that, because the Koreans often don't have many ships, because they're large ships, they're investing in them, they're spending money on infrastructure to maintain them, but they don't have that large a force allocated to them, they can't get that much out of the central government, so cannon are a noticeable advantage when it comes to sinking enemy ships, and that saves your personnel. It de-risks the battle to an extent. Sorry, someone is giving himself a good scratch. We happy? Okay. Now, these ships make sense for the Koreans, but one of the first things you realize when you start looking at them is these ships are about gaining sea control. These ships are about exploiting sea control. Neither is really the full fleet system. Neither is really the full force structure. Because they don't need to be. They don't need to be. And their government systems and the systems of governments they've been running haven't sustained that kind of investment because they don't need to. If you're just dealing with piracy and you're not planning on going and invading China, and you're not planning on going and invading Japan, and your major land threat for your army to focus on is your northern border with your Manchu/Jurchen raiders, well, you don't need big ships to take you to places with your troops. You're not going to use it for that. Now, you could say, well, what about the logistics up and down the coast? That's fine, but you've got fishing vessels, you've got local trading vessels you can hire for that. There are lots of options which mean you don't need specialist warships for that, because you're not mounting major expeditions. And they're going to be operating within the blanket cover provided by your warships. So this is the really interesting thing about the Imjin War, is that whilst the Japanese have a clear advantage on land, and a clear advantage in organization, in structure, in weaponry and training on land, they have clear advantages. At sea, when the Korean Navy actually is able to fight, and is actually led by someone who is willing to fight being an operative word, they have an advantage. They have an actual technological and material advantage. Even before the turtle ships, even before those wonderful Kabuksans come into service and are made available, they have an advantage. Now, as I said again, the fact is, they're not there from the first battles. They appear later. They appear after the war's been going for about a month. Now, for my strong belief on this subject, is that these are vessels which had already been under construction. These are vessels which Yi Sun-sin had already had under construction. Because how else are they going to appear that quickly? They're not something. You don't manufacture that much iron, that many oarsmen, that much wood, and have it seasoned to the level they do season it, which is not quite the same as others, but they still season it to an extent, and have all the sails, all the rigging, all the rope, all this stuff in place, ready to go, and you can build it overnight, or even in a month. You can't do that. It's just not going to happen. But that's not a bad thing. I once said this to someone told me, you are destroying the myth, you're degrading the Korean people. I'm not. It means that some in Korea were watching what was going on in Japan and elsewhere in the world and were preparing. And they were being sensible about it. But also, there is the sincere point that those same people would know they're still dealing with the same court as they've always been dealing with, and that court literally sees competency as a threat. So you don't want to look more prepared than anyone else. You don't want them to know you're preparing realistically. You want to tuck this production, tuck this construction, tuck this preparation into what you're doing normally. And I think that explains why it's Yi Sun-sin, because also he's prepared to take those risks in the name of Korea. He's also prepared to go off and do the research and find out about this old idea and bring it back. And I know there's many discussions about whether they're an early type of ironclad or what they are. The fact is, they are a ship which is designed to make boarding as difficult as it physically can be, whilst allowing them to bring their cannon to bear. And I think that is a bit of an evolution of the older design, because the older design did not have cannon from my reading of them. I could be wrong. From my reading of them in the limited two books, neither of which would I actually recommend. But they're the only books I can find about that discuss in English the earlier vessels. From that reading, I don't think the earlier ones had cannon. But they did have other systems. And you must also realise that the cannon that the Koreans used didn't necessarily just fire balls or solid shot. They also would fire darts, and all sorts of other interesting things could be loaded on them to make an example of their opponents. It was really quite devastating when it wanted to be. And that being said, let's consider the Battle of Okpo. Now, this battle came about not long after the Japanese had started the war. And the Japanese had after receiving the delegates, the two scholars, the Western and Eastern representative from the Korean court, and then sent their own ambassadors. And their ambassadors had been very simple and direct in what they'd wanted. They'd wanted the freedom to be able to land in Korea and march through to attack Ming China. Now, here's the thing. A, that's basically de facto declaring war on Korea anyway, because it's attacking their closest ally. But B, think about that again. We want to land in Korea to invade China. Now, if you know anything about that terrain, that's not realistically a good idea, and logistically, that's insane. Admittedly, it's the closest point to Japan, but it's not sensible. Especially when you have naval capabilities, you should probably go and invade China. That would probably be sensible. Go and invade China. So Realistically, what he's actually saying is, I want to invade Korea. And I want you to give me permission to invade Korea. And then once my troops are there, I'll take everything over. So that sends them into a panic. Unfortunately, the general panic continues and there are all sorts of issues. But the funniest is really with the Navy, because you have lots of different admirals, lots of different sections of the Navy divided up. And, well, if I give you an example of a couple to do, Baek Hong, who was in charge of the Asonsang, left, ordered his weapons stores destroyed and scuttled his fleet of 100 warships without giving combat because Busan had fell. Because Busan fell, he panicked. He had a panic. That's the phrase used to describe it in several works. No, that's not a panic. That is a full-blown breakdown. That is a full-blown... That makes MacArthur look pretty... MacArthur just went to his bedroom. He did not order the destruction of all the equipment and everything else. No. He just went to his bedroom. That makes MacArthur look good. And one of the problems with the history of Yi Sun-sin, I will say, is because of his contemporaries being quite so individually interesting, let alone on a collective level, suggesting that competency has been the furthest thing from anyone's mind in selecting them, that he looks amazing, even if he would look amazing if he did nothing other than keep his fleet organized. He would look absolutely amazing if he did nothing other than just keep his fleet organized. But I would love to say that's the only person who gets rid of his fleet, but no. There's also Won Kyun, who attempted to withdraw his ships to Hansanda, but saw some fishing vessels approaching. They're actually Korean fishing vessels. But he decided it must be the Japanese fleet. And instead of offering battle, he started to destroy his weapons, stores, and scuttle his fleet. Only being stopped when his subordinates managed to dissuade him from deserting his command and pointed out that it was a fishing fleet. And by this point, there's only 4 of his vessels remaining. This, by the way, is the gentleman who the Korean court decide is going to succeed Yi Sun-sin in command when they decide they need to get rid of Yi Sun-sin because his competence is becoming scary. Glad to know they didn't want to pick someone who would also be scary to them. There again, I'm fairly sure he wasn't scary to anyone, and I would like to have a sincere discussion with his wife as to whether he ever actually found her, but that might be a bit insulting. But I'm sorry, it just seems appropriate for someone who managed to do all that. I'm presuming Baek Hong never found anything. The competency of the Korean admirals and generals in this period is truly... It has to be read about, and even then you're not sure whether to believe it, because if it was a slapstick comedy routine, you'd find it too off the wall. You really would. I challenge anyone to go and read it. The Korean people, the Korean soldiers who fight, the sailors who fight, they do with honor, they do great. Their leadership, their government at the time... Honestly, they start to make me actually feel mildly patriotic about British governments. That's how they are. It actually makes me start to think Britain has been well governed when I read about the government in those periods of Korea. And I'm sorry about that. That sounds cruel, but it's just the way it is. It is just that bad. Anyway, at this point, Won Kyun calls for Yi Sun-sin to come and assist him. Because, well, he's got no fleet left. Yi, in his own case, was actually trying to get another commander called Yi Oki to bring his ships to combine with him. But the trouble they were having coordinating was that, how do I put this politely? Central Command hated it. And unless they gave them permission, they weren't supposed to leave their areas. They weren't supposed to be coordinating. They weren't supposed to be working together. No. That could be a threat. That could be a threat to the central government. No. You're not supposed to coordinate or work together. Only when we tell you to. Eventually, orders come from the capital. And the orders are to combine with Won Kyun, rather than the only other Navy commander who's kept his forces, Yi Oki. Yi Oki is actually a good friend and someone he will combine with later, and again, someone who will be given command at a certain point, but will not, I don't think, does survive the war. The orders to combine are based on the fact that Central still believes that Won Kyun has his fleet. They actually don't even word really who's supposed to be in command well. They presume it's going to be Won Kyun because whoever has the largest fleet should take command. Yi Sun-sin arrives with 39 warships. That's 24 Panakasuns and 15 Hypersons and 46 fishing vessels is how they're usually described, to combine with the 4 remaining vessels of Won Kyun. And this is the force that goes to fight the Battle of Okpo. And the Battle of Okpo is exactly how you think a battle between warships and transports would go. You really do have to consider it a battle between warships and transports. With a pretty standard formation of the large heavy ships in the centre and light vessels arrayed on left and right flanks, Won Kyun kept to the back of the formation. Yi Sun-sin seems to be fairly certain he likes Won Kyun behind him, where he can't startle. Feels if he's behind him, he won't startle. Plus, he's not depending on him to do much other than be behind him. It seems to be a safe position to put Won Kyun in. And I have to agree with Yi Sun-sin, that is a sensible position to put Won Kyun in. They approach the harbour of Okpo, and they find that there are 50 Japanese transport vessels, mostly uncrewed, because most of their crews are looting in the village. And so, Yi attacks. Due to the smoke that already was going up from the village, the Japanese actually didn't even notice the Korean fleet had arrived until it was upon them. And that's always a bad position to be in. The Japanese then panicked, tried to board their ships, tried to escape, found they were surrounded, hemmed into port, and they were surrounded by warships. The Koreans attack with their cannon. The Japanese, under orders from their at least acting commander, Toro Takatora, tried to mount a defence with their arquebuses, but they were anti-personnel weapons, and against the thick hulls, the thick wooden hulls of the Japanese, of the Korean vessels, they did zilch. Eventually, the Japanese are forced to throw their weapons and armour overboard, abandon ships and jump into water because they're just not getting out there. They're going to hold. And 26 of the Japanese transports are destroyed in bombardment. Another 24 are captured. It's useful. But Yi Sun-sin doesn't send his men ashore to pursue the Japanese inland. No, he keeps on seizing ships and keeping on doing the duty he's supposed to be. At this point, Won Kyun gets involved in the battle, though. Don't worry, he has a marvellous thing. When a ship is seized, a Japanese vessel is seized by some of Yi Sun-sin's men, and they are busily trying to get it organised, he decides it must be the Japanese, and so starts bombarding it, and only stops when ordered to. That's pretty much his entire involvement in the battle. Could have been worse. It could have been worse. The Japanese tried to flee to various harbours and are followed by Yi Sun-sin, and it carries on like this. It carries on like this. Then we have the Battle of Happo. And in this battle, there are 5 Japanese vessels, and these are vessels which managed to escape from Okpo, or at least weren't close enough, weren't in with the rest of the fleet, when it happened, so managed to pull away. And they are pursued by Yi Sun-sin, and surprisingly, they get annihilated. Can't think why. They get caught. They get caught by a force which is primarily Yi Sun-sin's force of 24 Panakosons, 15 Hypsons, sons, and 46 fishing vessels. But Kyun, by this point, has, luckily for him, has got the 4 Panakosons, has also crewed 2 more small ships. By the time he gets to Happo. There is a debate about whether or not those ships are actually his or they're just attached to his formation. There is a strong possibility they are attached to his formation, and that they are vessels which Yi Sun-sin has attached there with his own personnel on board to keep an eye on Won Kyun and make sure he does what he's supposed to do. Because at this point, I think Yi Sun-sin could be excused for wondering if Won Kyun was actually working for the other side. He was doing such a good job of fighting for them and supporting them. It really was a great skill he was showing off. It really was a great skill. And then, and this, by the way, is one of the books that I have on the Imjin War. It's by Samuel Hawley. Again, it's not something which I'd strongly recommend, but it's about the only one which is readable of the English language ones that provides you with a decent context and overview. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I have Korean friends who will quite happily rail at me about it. But it's the only one I can, whilst not recommend, say if you do want to go read further, please don't go look up Samuel Hawley's work. And then, a few days after the Battle of Happo, Yi Sun-sin gets a report of 13 Japanese ships. 13. And so he goes out and pursues them. And he sinks 11 of those 13 ships. Again, it's the same fleet he used previously. He is dominating them with warships. He's dominating transports with warships. But the thing is, at no point so far has there been any involvement from Kabuk Sans. There's been none of them. They show up in the Battle of Sachon. They show up on what was the 29th of May, 8th of July. Roughly, well, the war theoretically starts in the lunar calendar on the 13th day of the 4th month. Which is supposed is roughly April. So we're talking 6 weeks into the war. They appear. And when I say they, I mean actually one appears. One. Which kind of fits again with the whole, we were constructing these things, sort of preparing for them slowly, covertly, without really telling the centre, and had this going. And Yi Sun-sin and Won Kyun, again, partnering up, taking a total of 25, mostly, and I do mean mostly Panakosons, with them, and a single turtle ship. And they're engaging 13 Japanese warships. And this force realistically is the first time they actually face proper Japanese warships. They are more than likely, far more likely, to be Sekibun rather than Atakebun, but there does seem to be possibly one or two of the latter of the Atakebun there. And he quite literally lures them out. He lures them out. He gets there to the Saishon area where he's heard from Won Kyun they are. He managed to get up a large cliff and sort of managed to look down on the city, see the Japanese troops wandering all over the city, and sees the Japanese warships anchored in the harbour. And he knows he can't attack them in such close confined waters because that's going to be a boarding action, and that means the arquebuses firing down not just at the Koreans from the ships but also from the top of cliffs would give them a decisive advantage. He can't afford to do that fight, not in close proximity. So what he does is he lures them out to sea. And that's his plan, is to lure them out to sea. Now there's a whole debate about whether or not the Japanese sometimes might as we chased them away and then had the battle. But it's kind of playing into his tactical scenario. So yes, you're chasing them, but it's kind of like the High Seas Fleet is chasing the battle cruiser the battle cruiser fleet prior to the Battle of Jutland getting really going with the main fleet engagement. They're chasing it, but what they're chasing it to is not a good event for them. And this is the first battle he has. He has a turtle ship. He has and I'm going to get this right because I keep trying to make sure I'm getting it right and it's sounding correct, a kabaksan. He has it. And so he managed to engage. And the Japanese turn around quite quickly. The Japanese find themselves in a fight, but they can't get away. They can't maneuver as well, and there's so much cannon fire coming at them, there's so much heavy engagement, they can't really stop the battle and be sensible with it. And whilst they fight as well as they can, return fire with the arquebuses, these are fully crewed ships and they are being well organised, well led, they can't board the Korean ships. Because of the cannon fire, because the Koreans are standing off doing an artillery engagement. They ain't going close for a duel, they're doing an artillery engagement. And that's the reality, they can't board it. And then there's the turtle ship. It's just charging up and down with iron spikes on its roof, possibly an ironclad roof, we're not quite sure. But they really can't board that. And so they're just dealing with this constant overload of firepower. The ship that's getting close enough they can board, they can't board. The ship that they can board are stacking further away and are just blasting away at them. Now, the fight doesn't go all the Korean way. Yi Sun-sin is shot by a Japanese arquebuser. He doesn't die, but it does leave him with a minor injury. And it takes a couple of hours, but the entire Japanese fleet is destroyed. It is destroyed. And it caused a lot of problems for the Japanese. So that being said, I normally finish these videos off with a question, because we've done the beginning of the war, the turtle ship coming in, and how it had been going on since then. I'll probably do more about this war over time. I like the Indian War, but I'd like to wait till I had a lot more information before I get into the wider war. It's been something which has interested me a lot, and I was really excited when Age of Empires had it featured. Had the turtle ship, and you could do the campaign of Yi Sun-sin. It wasn't that good, but for a computer game version, it was actually pretty good, I suppose. It wasn't that good from a historical perspective, but from a computer game rendition of it, it was, yeah. I found it a good thing to start, a good starting point, an interesting starting point. But what's today's question? Today's question is going to be quite a complex question. Put yourself in a position of working in such a scenario as Yi Sun-sin found himself in, where competency was seen as a threat, seen as a massive threat. But you're also a patriot and you want to prepare your country for war. How do you do it? How do you hide things, not just from enemies, but from your own government? How do you go about it? I'd like you to think about that. How do you build a network of people you trust, for starters? What have we got coming up? Well, this week we have got Toshima and Jutland. And it's quite good to have them together because, honestly, it's going to be interesting. And I should be recording them both again on Monday. But that's if I've rewritten the hang on, no, this won't come out then. No, I'm thinking about the week after when I'm recording this. No, when this comes out, it'll not be Toshima. It'll not be Toshima and Jutland. It won't even be Philip Vian, Boundless Aggression. It'll be possibly, well, let's think about it. So it will be probably the Battle of Midway. The Battle of Midway's coming in June. Oh, that'll be fun. That'll be fun. That'll be fun. The leadership of the Battle of Midway is going to be a cool one to do. And then it's also going to be Admiral Percy Walker Nels transforming the Canadian Navy. Ooh. I'm looking forward to these. Take care. Thank you for watching and hope you enjoyed. Thank you. And please do like, share and subscribe if you like the channel. Please do share it if you like the video, and please consider subscribing. And remember that bell, if it is fully filled in, that's when you get to decide what videos you watch, not YouTube. Everything other than a completely filled in bell, YouTube gets a measure of choice over what you see. Take care, and thank you very much for watching.